If you buy coffee, any coffee, you've probably noticed something over the past year. Your usual bag costs more, maybe a lot more. A 38-ounce container of Maxwell House went from about $13 to over $21 in less than a year. Folgers has raised prices 4 times since mid-2024. And if you buy specialty beans, those have crept up too. This isn't your imagination. Coffee prices hit their highest point in recorded history in February 2025. Not the highest in a decade, not the highest in a generation, the highest ever. Arabica futures reached $4.41 per pound, smashing a record that had stood since 1977. So what happened? Is this just inflation? A temporary blip? Not exactly. What we're living through is a collision of forces: climate disasters, a trade war, booming global demand, and a supply chain that was already fragile. And the uncomfortable truth is, some of this may be permanent. Let's break it down. Before we talk about what went wrong, it helps to understand the journey coffee takes to get to your cup. Because most people have no idea how long and complicated it really is. Coffee starts as a cherry on a tree, a bright red fruit about the size of a grape. The seed inside that cherry is the coffee bean. And here's the thing most people don't realize. It takes 3 to 4 years for a new coffee plant to even start producing fruit. Once the cherries are ripe, they're picked, mostly by hand. Then they're sorted, washed or dried, and the beans are extracted. Those green beans get bagged and shipped across oceans in containers, roasted at their destination, ground, brewed, from seed to cup. Roughly 4 years of growing, months of processing, weeks of shipping. Every step involves human hands. When you understand how long and fragile that chain is, you start to understand why a drought on the other side of the world shows up in your grocery bill. To understand the crisis, you need to know one thing. 2 countries, Brazil and Vietnam, grow 56% of all the coffee on Earth. Brazil dominates Arabica. That's the smooth, complex variety in your specialty beans and most bagged coffee. Vietnam dominates Robusta, the stronger, more bitter variety used in instant coffee and espresso blends. In 2024, both countries got hit at the same time. Brazil experienced its worst drought in 70 years. The state of Minas Gerais, where most of Brazil's Arabica comes from, was devastated. Crop estimates were slashed by as much as 11 million bags. And it wasn't just the quantity. The drought produced lighter, less dense beans, less coffee, and worse coffee. Then there's Vietnam. First came a prolonged drought driven by El Nino, then severe flooding in the Central Highlands, their key growing region. 2 consecutive years of climate damage. Exports dropped over 11%. When the countries that grow more than half the world's coffee both have bad years at the same time, there's nowhere to make up the shortfall. Colombia had a strong harvest in 2024, but they're forecasting a decline this year. And there's a new concern. A bacterium called Xylella fastidiosa has been detected in several Colombian coffee regions. It's not a crisis yet, but it's worth watching. Here's the bigger picture. These aren't random events. Climate scientists have been warning for years that suitable Arabica growing land could shrink significantly by 2050. What we're seeing now might be the early signs of that shift, and there's a detail most people miss. It's not just the beans. There's been a global shortage of the 20-foot shipping containers used to transport coffee. So even the coffee that did get harvested had trouble getting to market. Here's something most people don't know. This isn't the first time coffee prices have gone haywire. In 1975, a massive frost hit southern Brazil, what they call a black frost. It destroyed an estimated 1.5 billion coffee trees overnight. Prices surged from about 50 cents a pound to over $3, and in 1970s money. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $19 a pound today. In East Germany, the government couldn't afford to import coffee anymore. Their solution? They invented something called Mischkaffee, a blend of real coffee cut with roasted barley, rye, and chicory. When they tried to phase out real coffee entirely, it nearly caused a public revolt. The 1977 crisis took years to recover from, because coffee trees take 3 to 4 years to mature. You can't just replant and have beans next season. Sound familiar? That's exactly the situation Brazil is in right now. And this time, there's no country with a spare 56% of global supply waiting to pick up the slack. Now layer in the trade war. In 2025, the US imposed tariffs on imports from several major coffee-producing countries, 50% on Brazil, 20% on Vietnam, 10% on Colombia. Here's why that matters so much. The United States produces essentially zero coffee beans. Hawaii grows a tiny amount, but commercially we import every single bean. When you put a 50% tariff on the country that supplies a third of your coffee, there's no domestic alternative. You just pay more. The impact was immediate. Brazil's coffee exports to the US dropped over 80%. J.M. Smucker, the company behind Folgers and Café Bustelo, buys 500 million pounds of unroasted beans a year, mostly from Brazil and Vietnam. They raised prices to match. And then something strange happened. Brazilian coffee exports to Colombia surged 578% in a single month. The suspicion? Cheaper Brazilian beans being mixed with Colombian coffee to dodge the higher tariff. By November 2025, the tariffs were largely rolled back, but the damage was done. Months of price spikes had already worked their way through the supply chain and onto grocery store shelves. The lesson? Coffee is one of those products where tariffs hit consumers almost dollar for dollar. There's no way around it when you don't grow the stuff yourself. It's not just US tariffs adding pressure. The European Union passed a deforestation regulation requiring every coffee company to prove their beans aren't linked to forest destruction. In principle, that's a good thing. In practice, it's a compliance nightmare, especially for smallholder farmers in places like Ethiopia, where 30% of coffee exports go to Europe. Most of these farmers don't have the documentation systems to prove compliance. The regulation has been delayed twice already, but even the uncertainty is adding costs. Roasters and importers are spending money on compliance infrastructure before the rules even take effect. It's a reminder that well-intentioned policy can still raise prices, especially when the burden falls hardest on the people least equipped to handle it. So supply got crushed. But demand? Demand is booming. China added over 20,000 coffee shops in a single year. That's roughly 55 new coffee shops opening every single day. Their coffee consumption has grown 150% in the last decade. The market is worth nearly $19 billion and climbing fast. India's coffee market is projected to double by 2030. Across Asia-Pacific, demand is up over 14% since 2018. As consumption flattens in Europe and North America, Asia is picking up the slack, and then some. This is the part that matters for the long term. A drought ends. Tariffs get rolled back. But 20,000 new coffee shops in China don't close. A generation of young Indian professionals who discovered specialty coffee don't stop drinking it. The supply shocks are temporary. The demand growth is structural. And that's why, even when prices come down, and they will come down, they probably won't come all the way back. Let's talk about what this actually means at the register. U.S. ground coffee hit $9.14 per pound in September 2025. That's 41% higher than the year before. The median price for a regular coffee rose in 41 states. And then there's shrinkflation. Nestle got caught shrinking their Nescafé jars from 200 grams to 190. 6 fewer cups per jar, same price on the shelf. Coffee packages across multiple brands quietly dropped from 12 ounces to 10.5. Starbucks hedged their bean prices through 2025. Their CFO warned the real price increases hit customers in 2026. That's now. Here's an interesting twist, though. Specialty coffee prices barely moved. While commodity coffee jumped over 14% in early 2025, specialty only rose about 0.5%. The gap between a bag of Folgers and a bag of single-origin beans has never been smaller. Which means, and this sounds counterintuitive, right now might actually be a good time to try better coffee. When the cheap stuff costs almost as much as the good stuff, the upgrade is basically free. You'd think that when coffee prices double, farmers would be celebrating. And in Brazil and Vietnam, some are. Farmers in those countries receive 90 to 95% of the export price. They're genuinely benefiting. But in less developed origins, parts of Africa and Central America, middlemen capture 40% or more. The farmer sees much less of that price spike. And there's a cruel irony. Many farmers are producing fewer bags because of the same droughts and floods that drove prices up. Higher price per bag times fewer bags often equals about the same income, or less, once you factor in rising costs for fertilizer and labor. The traditional specialty coffee model, paying above market price for better beans, is being rethought. When market price is already $4 a pound, the premium that used to make specialty worthwhile barely registers. The people growing your coffee are not, on the whole, getting rich from this. The biggest winners are traders and large-scale producers in countries with efficient supply chains. The smallholder farmer picking cherries by hand, their situation is complicated at best. There's good news. Brazil's 2026-2027 crop is projected to be a record harvest, potentially 66 to 71 million bags. That's a 17% increase. The World Bank expects Arabica prices to drop 13% this year and another 5% next year. But here's the honest take. Prices are not going back to where they were. The 2020 to 2023 era of cheap coffee was the anomaly, not the norm. Climate change makes supply shocks more frequent, not less. Asia's demand growth is permanent. New regulations, like the EU deforestation rules, will add cost to the supply chain. And whenever more than half the world's supply comes from just two countries, you're always one bad weather season away from another spike. The realistic outlook? Prices settle somewhere between where they are now and where they were 3 years ago, better than the peak. But the era of $2 a pound Arabica is probably behind us. So what did you actually do about all this? First, try specialty while the gap is small. Commodity prices have risen so much that a bag of Folgers is approaching what specialty used to cost. If there was ever a time to try better coffee, this is it. Second, buy whole beans. Pre-ground loses flavor fast, which means you're getting less value per dollar. Whole beans, ground fresh, extract more flavor from the same amount of coffee. Third, adjust your ratio. Most people use more coffee than they need. A kitchen scale costs about $12, and you'll probably use less coffee per cup once you start measuring. And finally, consider a subscription. Some roasters lock in prices for subscribers, which can protect you from the next price spike. None of this will fix the global supply chain, but it'll help you get the most out of every bean while the market sorts itself out. That's the story behind the price tag on your next bag of beans. It's climate, trade, and a world that's drinking more coffee than ever before. Have you noticed the price increase? Change what you buy. We'd love to hear about it. Drop your experience in the comments below. Thanks for watching.